Fantastic. Thank you everyone for coming in and learning a little bit more about this, about us and the talk that we're having today. I'll start with
Start the recording.
the recording.
Recording
Okay.
has started. DP?
Okay.
Cool.
I'll continue on. So the one of the things it's basically a story. What I'm looking for is this is very conversational and interactive. I have some preset scenarios that we'll talk through that I'll talk about and talk through. Simon will be here to help me talk about from his perspective as far as a coach is concerned. And then what I'm looking for is really just a conversation. These are stories or things that have been happening in ways that which coaching has helped me specifically in moving further along in my career and helping through that. I'm hoping to convey the importance and the benefits of actually having an agile coach in your either in your organization or in your personal life to help you through your work. That being said, I'll start with this. This is the first one, which is well coached. The title has changed. It's been a progression as we've started this, but right now this is really talking about our impact of how lasting change is through my coaching sessions, how it's actually changed me as a person for the long-term benefits that I'm currently taking with me, even though a lot of my sessions with Simon are no longer available to me. So I'll get started with that. Oops. No, I don't have technical difficulties. All right. One of the things we'll learn we'd like to convey today is one of the things you'll learn is the value of coaching, the applicability of coaching personally and professionally. And then we'll also talk about through these talks and discussions is the collective impact of coaching on an organization, an agency, or a group. Go to the next one. A panel. That's just me. It's my picture of me. I'm Michael Knight. I'm the product owner for the Scrum Alliance. The team that I actually am a product owner for is for the personas of Agile coaching. So I have the unique perspective of having the benefit and understanding and the benefit of having a coach in our personal life and in our organization. And it's also given me a unique perspective as a product owner, as in the coaches being, oh my goodness, being my persona and my customer. So it's an interesting interesting dynamic between me and the coaches. The thing that you'll have on there also is my email address in case you wanted to contact me via email. And then there's Simon. I'll let him speak for himself.
Hi there. I'm super thrilled to be here. It's about 10 to 10 in the evening here in the Rocky Mountains in Canada. But I'm really happy to be doing this with Mike. I've been an Agile coach now for about 17 years. I've got my Scrum Alliance Enterprise Coach certification back in 2010. And I've been working with software teams, manufacturing teams, construction teams. It's all about teams. It's all about people. It's all about conversations. And so, yeah, we'll have one tonight. Take it away, Mike.
All right. Thank you for that. All right. So we'll get to the first scenario. And so we'll talk about the three scenarios are kind of situated into three portions. The first aspect of it is the challenge for which we've identified what the actual issue is. Then there are some items that are on here that are more representative of conditions, or I would say symptoms of things that we've recognized as far as bullet points are concerned. And then we go into the approach for which through the sessions for which I've had with Simon, for which we talk about those approaches that we've used. And then there's also the third part, which is the outcomes and how those changes and those approaches panned out in real life and how we're working through all of the things that a product owner goes through in a given day. That being said, I'll start with the first one. Our first challenge is that our backlog visibility from an overview point, it was difficult to determine how things were progressing. And I'll talk a little bit about that. One of the things that we are at the Scrum Alliance that we have is that we do all of our products, or all of the product owners have their own backlogs. And having the ability for, because we have a very a visible backlog and transparency is one of our pillars, we like to have all of our backlogs be visible between each one of the teams. All of us can see each other's backlogs. It gives us an opportunity to actually see what work is being done in there, and there's maybe some opportunities for us to see what's going on. Through that process, what came out of that is that when people who weren't familiar with my actual backlog, I'm the product owner and I see these things on a weekly basis, on a sprint basis, these are very familiar to me. And so one of the things that came out of it is that when people were looking at at each one of our backlogs, it was very difficult to see the differences between things that were pieces of value, which were user stories, or what we tend to call product backlog items, or PBIs for short. And it was hard to see what things that were valuable that actually impacted our customers, as opposed to tasks or things that the team were actually doing, and some of the work that was going along that supported an actual a user story or a piece of value that we would be delivering for that sprint. So after having those conversations, I had a conversation with Simon, and through Simon. And so some of the things that we walk through is just really describing it. The sessions that we have, I'll just give it a little bit of context in regards to the sessions that I have with Simon. They're very conversational. I talk about the things that go on in a particular sprint that I see as a product owner that are having issues, or things that I'd like to correct, and or just look into more deeply. And so what that does is Simon has helped me in a way of asking me some very important questions that allow me to not necessarily look at the problem itself, but it does a lot. It helps me through our conversations to understand the deeper meaning of them. Sometimes we, as a product owner, I see a lot of information, and there's a lot of things that come to me, and having my sessions with Simon, it allows me to dig a little bit deeper into any particular reason, as opposed to just having, oh, this is a problem that I'm dealing with and I can't see it. He allows me to have a more in-depth conversation about some of the ideas or ways that we can resolve a particular issue. I wouldn't say resolve, but to address a particular issue and to get it moving further, or to get it unstuck from the status that it's in. The approach we ended up going with is that we added visual indicators and tags to our product backlog, and that allowed people to be able to do, who came into our backlog, they could actually see visually things that were pieces of value. And the way we did that is that we actually color coded items that were in our backlog that were pieces of value. So they had a green bar to them if they had value to them. Any items that were in there that you could see in the backlog, they didn't have those aspects in there. We also had tags in there where you could do filtering, where you could pull in things for tasks, or for things that were either a user story, or if you wanted something that was attached to a particular initiative, we had tags in there too. So it allowed us to do both items of that. The outcome of that is that we did have improved conversations with upper management and the team about the things that were in flight. So it did improve the things that when people were able to come into our backlog and get a sense of the things that were actually either in the current sprint, or things that we were planning to do in the sprint, in the next sprint. So it really helped with having those conversations and facilitating a lot of the connection between when management is looking at things from a business perspective, and the aspect of the teams themselves and the work that's going on. So it really was a way for us to have more of a level playing ground or playing field, so that we can have more decision-making type of conversations. That's it for scenario one. Is there any questions, or let me backtrack just a second. Simon, would you like to add anything to?
Yeah, I want to. This has been interesting for me, because part of my coaching process is that when we have these conversations, is that I take notes. And so this conversation probably took place, geez, Mike, I don't know, a year ago.
Yes.
Probably longer than a year ago. And so I was able to go back and look at some of the notes that I took. And essentially when you brought this topic up, what we ended up doing was, you and I together did a sort of real-time review of your backlog, and not only your product backlog, but your sprint backlog. Because from my perspective, the way that I view this, things that are in your product backlog should always have value, but we can't necessarily just get there immediately. So part of the conversation that we had is, well, what's the next best thing that we can do right now? And I did see in my notes that we talked about, if we're going to have the team view success as being able to show every sprint how their audience or how their customers' life has changed or is a little bit better, then we need to make sure that the things that they're working on, or at least that people can see that they're working on and that they're working on, are actually of value. So that's these were the kinds of conversations that we were having, which would back up to, it's not just about the backlog, it's about, well, what are we trying to use this backlog for? It's so that on a regular basis, we can actually, at the end of a sprint, have something that we can say, oh, so our customer's life is different a little bit now, and here's how. And so, yes, Mike decided, through this conversation, that the next step was, well, okay, for now, let's just make sure that we can visibly make sure that people can see this has got customer value, this has got customer value. But I think it's important to recognize here is that this evolves, right? That was a step one. And, I was, again, looking back at my notes, it got to a place where eventually Mike had a multi-release story map, right? And so that maybe you start with a backlog and you start with trying to make sense of that backlog, and then the types of decisions that you work on with the team evolve these things to the place where in some cases you may not actually use a backlog. You may end up just using a story map. So any return thoughts on that, Mike?
Yes, absolutely. So it did turn into something that really evolved over time, and that's one of the benefits of it. At the time, I didn't know exactly how to display the information to get it to someone, and we had a system that we used Trello as a way of keeping track of the items that we have in there. And so Trello is a very flexible platform, which is great for that. But when we got into the actual practicality of it and having a view that was easier for someone who didn't have an intimate knowledge of it. That was the kind of conversations we were having, because it was very difficult for me to when I looked at the backlog, I saw it as, I gave this analogy before, it's like Matrix code. I'm so familiar with it until I don't actually see any of the code. I just see the work. I don't see the task as opposed to the user stories. It's a piece of value that is a culmination of various different things. And so having the conversation with Simon was very beneficial, because he could come at it from a different perspective than I could without the head knowledge that I come when I actually look at something, just because I'm so intimate with it.
Anybody got any questions or thoughts about
questions
that?
or comments or? No, no, it's a quiet bunch. This is going to get boring if we don't get some participation. Is there? I can totally go through this, but one of the things that one of the benefits of having a coach is to be very conversation about it. Is there any questions that you'd like to ask us or ask me, or get some clarity on what we've discussed so far in this particular scenario?
That's okay.
Okay. All right. Well,
yeah,
we'll go
one challenge I see is doing it remote. How exactly we are going to do this? Visual indicators and other things, right? Different tools we have to rely on, or is it just with an Excel?
In regard, as far as as looking at it transferring it from something that's in Trello to maybe more of a backlog, or not a backlog, but a roadmap type of display.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it actually did move into a spreadsheet. And so I actually have a Google Doc that talks about it from a roadmap standpoint. So it has months and quarters in there. And then I also have on a column level all of the pieces of value, and those are actually linked back to the Trello board for
Okay,
quick
okay.
reference, so that as the cards move along and they're getting done, it's easier for us to link back to the Trello work and track what work has actually been done in the subsequent cards that are associated with that particular initiative.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
We'll
Thank
go
you.
to the next. All right. In that case, I'll go to the next one. This challenge was about sprint planning, was taking extremely long time with discussions about items and the backlog. And so I'll go back to the particular time. At that time, we were having the appropriate refinement meetings, and we were having having a sprint planning. And normally our sprint planning sessions are about an hour and a half to 2 hours long. That's the time box that we have for it. But what was happening is that we were having discussions. Me as a product owner, I generally I talk about the items, and then we pull things into the actual sprint. This is what I'm most comfortable, how I see how the sprint planning should go. What was actually happening is that we would bring a card into a particular sprint, and then the team would have discussions about that particular card, where people didn't necessarily understand the card itself. There were people who weighed in on the card because they had a different perspective in regards to the card. And so what it turned into was a lot of gnashing of teeth of something that was a card or a user story that was ready to go. But when the team actually had discussions and putting it into the actual into the sprint, we had discussions about how many people were actually involved with the particular sprint. There were a lot of discussions about who would actually take on take on the actual work, how many people were needed to that. In our team, we have maybe a little bit different it's actually a lot different than most teams that I've been a part of, is that I normally have a technology team, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of similar skill sets on that team. On ours currently, we have very specific skill sets for each individual. So for example, our team is made up of a marketing person, we have a graphics designer, we also have a copywriter, we have a developer on our team. And so with all of we have an education person in here, and we also have a support person on our team also. And so because they have such different aspects of the work that needs to get done, there were a lot more discussions in regards to understanding what each person needed to do to get that particular piece of value to the finish line. And so there was a lot of discussions around that, and we would burn through of that 2-hour session when I would like to get most of the items put into the sprint so that we can get started with the work. We ended up having a lot of discussions about these items, so much so that the sprint planning would actually end. The time box would go over a half an hour to an hour, and then we would end up having to reschedule it for another one because we didn't finish getting everything that we needed to into the actual sprint. So that's kind of the story of the background and what was going on at that particular time. Some of the bullets that I've outlined here is that we weren't able to get, as I've said before, that we weren't able to get sprint planning within our time box time. And then the teams actually felt uneasy about the sprint when it started, because there was a lot of information that they didn't quite understand how the work was getting done. And then when we start a sprint, we like to get started with the work. And so from that aspect, it didn't create a sense of comfort so that the team could start to actually do the work. It just turned into more discussion. Part of the sprint was actually other team members will say, "Oh, we'll have this conversation after the sprint planning has started, or has actually sprint has started," which was, kind of taking additional time to get work done, or getting understanding of the work as opposed to actually doing the work. Okay, so I'll go through that's the scenario. The approach that we use, that we settled in on with my sessions with Simon, was that we actually increased the time box for our backlog refinement And then we actually ended up educating the team on what the purpose of a refinement was, which basically is that's the place where we have those types of discussions. Sprint planning really isn't the appropriate place to have discussions and understanding of a lot of the work that we actually getting done. That work is done much more much more earlier than actually in the sprint. The refinement happens a week before before we start the sprint planning, and that gives us a lot more time. So we ended up, and our refinements were allotted for 3 hours, but they were only taking about 45 minutes to an hour. And so what we ended up doing was reversing that time and spending a lot more time in refinement and getting the team to understand that this is the place where they should have those in-depth conversations to help them feel more at ease, so that when we get to planning, that it's more towards a planning aspect where we have the sprint, we look at the work that's available, and then we start slotting things into those meetings. Should I go into it to get into outcomes, or do you want to talk, Simon, would you like to talk about your perspective on this one?
Yeah, I'll chat a little bit here. I was looking from my notes. Yeah, these conversations, or this particular conversation, was really about coming back to first principles around Scrum. So there is no formal activity known as refinement. It is something that happens as needed by the team. And really the conversation that Mike and I had was really, well, what's the purpose of planning and what's the purpose of refinement? And however you're holding those meetings, are they meeting what you need them to meet in order to fulfill the goal of that activity? And of course, the answer was no. And so we started there, and then I talked to Mike and asked him a few questions about things like, what do you think you as a product owner can do to help this, right? And further to that, what have you and the team already tried? Have you tried to change anything? Right. And so it was by going through this kind of conversation that Mike realized, oh, well, no, we actually allot some time for this, but we never use the time for this. And I think, this was a pretty straightforward kind of aha. If we just go back to first principles on this, we recognize that, we're just not paying attention to what outcomes do we need to accomplish with a refinement activity, for instance. And are we meeting it? And if we are, great, then planning will probably go quite well. But if we're not actually meeting the outcomes of some sort of refinement, where at least you have an idea of priorities, maybe some acceptance criteria, and some rough sizing of things going into planning, right? This is what matters. This is what the team needs to make sure that they're not in an all-day planning session. Yes. So how did it end up, Mike? How did it evolve? What steps did you take there with the team?
So after having that conversation with Simon, I actually went back to the team, and I actually went back to my Scrum Master and said, hey, listen, the refinements don't seem, I talked to him about, hey, the planning is getting very long, and so what I'd like to do is to try to more fully utilize our refinement session. And so one of the things that we did was he actually said, okay, right now it's about 2 hours. Would you like to extend the time? And I said, actually, I think I do. And so we extended our refinement time block from 2 hours, and granted, we weren't using the 2 hours at that particular time, into extending it to 3 hours. And so what the 3 hours allowed for us all to do is it gave more space for me to talk about the story, like talk about the context of what the actual story or that piece of value that we wanted to have. And it gave me the chance to get the team to understand the actual problem, so that they can have more in-depth conversations about the solutions. One of the things as a product owner we shouldn't do is talk about solutions and rely on the team to have those solution conversations to deal with the solutions. And so having a refinement as in talking about the problems, it gave a lot more space for solutioning. And the team actually provided a lot better solutions, and were able to maximize that time because they had more of an interactive conversation about, I have an idea, I think we can do this, and another person would add another thing to it. Oh, we can also add this aspect to it. So for example, we would have conversations about having a search functionality for our coaches. And so I had an idea in my head about what I thought was search functionality was. And then some of the marketing people came involved, and they said, you know what, I think we can do something in regards to like a home advisor type of thing, where it's a huge, a lot of questions where we get asked, we kind of guide the person through searching for a coach. And so that time that we spent on really one problem, as opposed to maybe trying to deal with a lot of different problems at one time, which tends to happen in planning. In refinement, it allowed us to have a lot more in-depth conversations, and we also created cards during our refinement too. So the cards that we actually created in the user stories were much more well defined. They had a lot more meat to them, so that when we got to planning was very, very smooth, and the team understood all of the cards before we got into planning, and they understood what type of work and the type of people who needed to be involved with a particular thing, as opposed to having a conversation of, I think I can do this, I think I can do that. In refinement, we actually had to find that, and we put the members on those particular cards, and we assigned a lot of that work right in refinement. Not that it's perfect, but we got a lot further along, so that when planning happened, it became a much more pleasant experience for all of us involved. I felt a lot better about it because the planning was fully, I felt like it was fully utilized from my perspective, as in maximizing value for our customers. And the team felt a lot better because when the sprint actually started, they knew what
Mike,
kind of work they needed to get ahead.
here.
Oh,
Sorry,
yes.
quick time check. I think we will have 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes? Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. And so that actually helped with our sprint planning. And now we have very efficient sprint planning sessions where we get pretty much all of the things that we can do for planning involved and added into that aspect. All right, so any questions in regards to this scenario, or any comments or any discussion points that you?
Yeah, so hi, this is Parul. I just have one comment. So in my team also, we had a similar scenario where our sprint or the backlog refinement was not very effective. And we actually adopted 3 amigos before the backlog refinement, where the one developer, the product owner, as well as a tester could sit, and they were the 3 amigos, and discuss the backlog and refine it to some extent before getting into backlog refinements. So those scenarios were also covered, and that made backlog refinement and team participation much, much better. And that is
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also used that perspective too, and a more development team, because on the 3 amigos, usually the developer is a senior developer, and so we have conversations from that to help with refinement. So I've done that also, and it's very, very effective for sure. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, Sriram here. Like, so when exactly we story point it? Like at the time of the refinement, or like only at the time of the planning?
Yes, story pointing. That's an excellent point. I actually have another scenario to talk about story pointing, but at the particular time, because we were moving from a more flat organization and implementing Scrum in our organization is more new than old to us internally. We had to spend quite a bit of time on we're at almost like an elementary level, which is we're just slotting the aspects of it. The developer on our team is very familiar with story pointing, and he uses Fibonacci to do that aspect of it. And so that pointing from his perspective, we did do that in refinement, but it was a much higher climb to get people who aren't familiar with Scrum at all to understand what the concept was. Adding story points was something that at the time I wanted to get something, I wanted to really solve the problem of the sprint planning being very long and not getting things out of it, as opposed to getting the sprint, getting points assigned to it to help with talking about velocity and things of that nature, where points become much more important from a more advanced level.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. But yes, points is absolutely the part where we would have those discussions. And we did have some of them with the people who were familiar, but there were still people who didn't understand it at all, really.
I'd just briefly say that in general, that's the kind of thing that would happen during refinement, because for me, the point of doing some sort of size estimation is to get an understanding of, oh, is that ready from a size perspective to be planned, right? So coming to a planning session and then realizing, wow, this thing is gigantic. That's not impossible, but to get into a rhythm of that in general, if you're going to use story points or some other estimation, for me, the point of it is to help the team understand, not only do we understand the acceptance criteria, but we also understand this seems like it might be the right size for us to plan for this coming sprint.
Yeah, because that's exactly where I coming in, right? Like because normally what we do, like story refinement session, it's like we will at least try to size it to some extent, so that we will know like whether we need to slice it more. We want to slice it into smaller stories, so that can be taken into the planning, or we get into the planning and do that activity. So probably like we will like to do that in the refinement session. But as somebody told, like, it is only with 3 amigos, not the entire team there sometimes. So it may not be accurate though, but still, at least we'll get a better idea on like whether we can slice the story into the smaller chunks for the planning, or like, okay, we can take it as it is. Right.
Mike and Simon, the last 5 minutes we have. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. And then we'll get to the last scenario is, and I'll go through this one pretty quickly. We'll talk about this one. The challenge that we were having is cooperating from the team level. So as I was saying before, we have a lot of teams that have very separate have personas and aspects of it, and it's complicated and more challenging when we don't have a lot of the same skills or replication within the team to where people could offload some of the work in that aspect of it. And so we tend to be very specific about the skill sets, and because we generally have in each one of our teams, we have one particular skill set in each team. So for example, we don't have 2 marketing people or 2 graphics designers on a team. We have 1 graphics designer on all of the teams, and we'll have 1 copywriter on all of the teams. We'll have 1 developer on all of the teams. And so what was happening is that from when the work was actually getting done, a lot of times we would meet as a co-op for the product owner aspect of it, and there would be things that would come through that would either affect our community that was done by another team that we never knew about. Sometimes it'd actually go to production, and then we would have to deal with some of the ramifications of that aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that we actually have items that came through, or somebody was working on a particular functionality that we could have benefited from if we had gotten involved with that particular functionality. So some of us were actually working on things such as course search at the exact same time, either that or we'd be working on something in one sprint and another person would be working on it in another sprint. And then we would have some code conflicts where someone was already releasing code, but then our other code was that we were working on was separate code. And then when we went to production, we had to pull it back. So there was a lot of duplication of that work and kind of a lot of just wasted time in regards to us getting things maximized because we, like I said before. Say that again? No? Oh,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Okay. So that's kind of the challenge. That was the challenge of describing what was going on at that particular time. Some of the, as I was saying before, the teams were working on items that were affecting other teams, and the teams needed help for particular backup items that we didn't have a way to share the need or coordinate availability. So some things needed multiple skill sets to get across. Not every team had every talent. So for example, we have a particular developer, a back-end developer that we didn't have on all of the teams. And so there are occasions where we need to plan and ask for a person that's on another team to help us with one of the pieces of value that we needed to do. And so we were kind of missing each other in regards to being able to plan that aspect out. And it would actually stop some of the items in my backlog and delaying them because we couldn't coordinate that with someone else. We were ready to work on it, but the person that could help us get to the finish line wasn't available at the particular time. So things started to get slow and sit around. The approach of that was to actually create an actual PO board, and it was at an organization level that allowed all of the product owners to actually put in their items that they were working on, and in there it facilitated conversations not only with the work that we could see, and it allowed people like me as a product owner who could see another product owner's work and say, hey, I see you're working on course search. We're actually planning on having conversations about that also. And so what that did was really to facilitate and give visual cues to us to see what actually was going on. And there was also a column in there that asked about actual help. So it allowed us as a product owner, whether it was on our backlog or not, if we needed particular help for our team, we could actually ask for that at our PO co-op area, and other product owners could weigh in and say, hey, I have availability for a person that could help with that particular item. Simon, do you want to talk about it from your perspective?
Yeah, I know we just have probably 1 minute here.
No, well, that's it. So, all right, so I'll get to the last part of it, and then
Okay.
The outcome of it is that we did improve one of the outcomes was that it did improve our visibility. But one of the things that we did run into was that our next issue, the challenge that came up was that we still had issues being able to coordinate those efforts between the teams. Even though we could see those aspects, the planning part of it still didn't match up. So we still have some more work to do in regards to redefining a new challenge that we've identified, even though we've added that particular part of it. And then we go back to having more sessions and coming up with new approaches to resolve the new challenge that's come up. I think that's the 1 minute, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Mike. That was really great to hear your experiences. On the behalf of the entire team, thank you so much for this. We would request you to spare some time if you have. Go to Networking Lounge and the Consulting Corner for further questions, and participants as well. If you would like to have some time with the speakers, you may move to Networking Lounge. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Hey, thank you.